Hey guys, Michael B. the Game Genie here, and welcome back to another episode of Top 3 Tuesday. Absent, of course, in the background is my green screen because my cats decided to use it as a litter box. So, unfortunately, I'll have no green screen for this video, although it is a solid colored wall behind me, so I guess I could try to edit it, but maybe another time. Hopefully my green screen is still salvageable and it'll be back up and running for next time. And I'm actually in my new studio. We actually had an apartment and we evicted our tenant, and now we're decided we're not going to rent it anymore, so I have a space down here which is a solitary recording studio now. So that's really cool. The great thing about that, I mentioned in another video that all the time I was moving my camera, I didn't know if I was in focus. I actually don't know if I'm in focus now, but this way, once I get everything set up, I can come down here and do videos like this where I'm talking directly to the camera and I'll always be in focus, hopefully. Anyways guys, we're back for Top 3 Tuesday like we do every time. I want to say thank you to the people who made video response to the last video, Top 3 Desert Island Games. They were Storage and Disposal, The Retro Nobody, Electric Ventures Tony, thank you. Michael Chrisman did another excellent article. Gary James, Captain Algebra, Nets Addict J, you finally got around to doing one. Herb Wars, new. Phil the Conquistador, Phil, another great video. My good friend 8-Bit Eric, which I think is so cool. Thanks Eric so much for doing this. And Eric did another one before, but it was a little bit late, but he actually was on time this time for Top 3 Desert Island Games. Last but not least, my fellow Newfoundlander, thanks so much Gerald, I really appreciate it. So today guys, we're going to be talking about games that I don't really play nowadays, but they were pretty much the standard era when I was a teenager growing up. Going back to the days of the arcade and the arcade machines, there was nothing better than playing that new fighting game that was coming out. And the experience of being able to take the arcade home and play a fighting game at home was so cool. And that's what fighting games did. You remember back to 1993 to 1995, I mean, there was nothing bigger than playing an arcade fighting game at home, playing with your friends. It was great. You'd have two people over and you could spend the entire day just beating the crap out of each other. So today I want to look back on the top 3 fighting games of the 16-bit era. Yeah. So my number 1 is kind of an interesting choice, and probably not one I'd pick today, but back then, right in the height of the 2D arcade fighting game era, Sega announced that they were going to release their own fighting game that would rival all those who have come before it. Eternal Champions was released in 1993 exclusively for the Sega Genesis at the time, and I couldn't wait to delve in and discover all the new fighters and their exciting movesets. I remember being pretty excited when I first got my hands on the game, but I don't ever really remember being very good at it. Which is interesting because when I went back to capture gameplay for this, I got my ass handed to me by the computer. And I don't mean a little bit, but I was mercilessly destroyed. It's a game that I find to be almost unplayable unless you have the 6-button joystick. With the 3-button joystick, you will have to constantly press the start button to switch back between punching and kicking. The game seems to have a pretty steep learning curve and would become much more enjoyable after mastering the movesets, and I am sure I've played better since. But since this list is based on nostalgia, it still makes it into my top 3. And my number 2 choice, really when it comes down to number 2 and number 1, it's kind of a toss-up for me, but my number 2 choice is... It wasn't a question of if Street Fighter II was going to make my list so much as to which iteration I would have picked. Growing up, I played each version relentlessly, and I'm actually most familiar with Street Fighter II Championship Edition on the Sega Genesis, which I played non-stop until I finally got a copy of Super Street Fighter II. Right from the very iconic start of Ryu rocking back and forth while lightning crashes behind him until the music hits a crescendo and he throws the Hadouken, I knew this game was going to kick all kinds of ass, and I never played another version again in my childhood. Of course, what I loved the most about Super Street Fighter II was the inclusion of the new characters, hearing their themes, and learning how to perfect their movesets. And once I did, well, I would just go back to playing with Ryu, as he was always my favorite, although Kami's tongue did excite a teenage version of Mike in ways it probably shouldn't have. It was the ultimate fighting game growing up, with pinpoint controls, beautiful graphics, and some of the coolest stage music around, and I loved it. but it didn't have one thing that set it aside from my number one. And last but not least, probably my favorite fighting game of all time, not just of the 16-bit era, but while Street Fighter II is arguably the more perfect fighting game of this era, it didn't have blood and fatalities, and enter Mortal Kombat 2. I grew up as a kid that loved horror movies, and the prospect of being able to rip someone in half in a video game killing them seemed fascinating to me. Combine that with the digitized character sprites that were taken from real actors, and it added a realness to the brutality. While Mortal Kombat offered that, it didn't on the Super Nintendo, which is the system I grew up with, but Mortal Kombat 2 sure did. No filter on the Super Nintendo for this one, and in my opinion, still the best version of Mortal Kombat 2 of that era. I played this game easily more than almost any other game on the system. I would come home and fight countless fights against player 2 with no one on that controller for a chance to master each of the character's special moves and all the finishing moves. Mainly I focused on the fatalities, and there was nothing better than finally mastering a tricky one. And there were just so many, as it bolstered a bigger roster than the first game, and each character had 2 fatalities and 3 pit fatalities. I love this game, and if I go to play a fighting game still to this day, I think back to my time as a teenager playing Mortal Kombat 2. So guys, those are my top 3 fighting games of the 16-bit era. What I want to do now is hear your top 3 fighting games of the 16-bit era. What I'd like for you guys to do, feel free to leave a comment down below, that'd be great, but feel free to do a video response too. The whole idea of the Top 3 Tuesdays is this is supposed to be a community thing, get other people out making videos about similar topics, and create this community where you share your top 3 with everybody else, and I encourage everybody to go check out everybody else's responses. So if you're going to make a video response, please send it to me either as a comment to this video, paste the link, or you can send it to me over social media, and I post all the videos up on my Facebook page, so check there if you want to see other people's responses, and let's try to get this community thing going. That's why it was originally started, and I think it's a fun idea, and if people want to do it, I enjoy doing it for them. Anyways guys, I can't wait to see your comments and see what your top 3 fighting games of the 16-bit era are. This is Michael B. the Game Genie in my new recording studio, makeshift for the time being until I get my green screen back. And I'll talk to you next time.